Here's a question nobody in personal finance or luxury culture ever seems to ask. When we say old money, whose rules are we actually talking about? Because the way a Rothschild thinks about wealth is fundamentally different from the way a Rockefeller does. And both of them, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, think about money in a way that would be almost unrecognizable to the old merchant families of Fujian province in China, or the ancient trading dynasties of Rajasthan in India, or the land-owning aristocracy of Kyoto. And yet when people on the internet talk about old money aesthetics or old money values, they almost exclusively mean one thing: European, Anglo-Saxon, Western. Today we're going to fix that. We are going to go deep, I mean genuinely deep, into two of the most sophisticated wealth preservation systems humanity has ever created: the Western old money tradition and the Asian old money tradition. We're going to look at how they were built, what values drive them, how they treat family, education, display, privacy, and legacy, and why understanding the differences between them might be one of the most important things you can do if you're serious about building generational wealth. This is not a surface-level video. Get comfortable. What is old money really? Before we compare two systems, we have to agree on what we're actually talking about. In the Western context, old money refers to wealth that has been accumulated over multiple generations, typically defined as 3 generations or more, and that carries with it a certain culture, a set of manners, values, and social codes that distinguish inherited wealth from newly acquired wealth. The classic markers most people associate with old money: understatement, quality over logos, education at elite institutions, service to the community, land ownership. These come specifically from the European aristocratic tradition, which was later adapted and reshaped by the American Protestant elite of the 18th and 19th centuries. Think the British landed gentry, the Brahmin families of Boston, the old Virginia planter class, the French grande familles, the German Junker class. These are the archetypes that people are referencing when they say old money. But here's what's critical to understand. The Western old money system is, historically speaking, relatively young. Most of what we call Western old money tradition was codified between roughly the 12th and 19th centuries. The English system of primogeniture, leaving everything to the firstborn son, only became standard in the Norman period, around the 11th century. The concept of the gentleman as a social ideal was largely a creation of the Renaissance, and the famous American old money culture of restraint and understatement, that was essentially invented in the Gilded Age as a reaction against the nouveau riche robber barons. Now contrast this with Asia. The Chinese concept of jia, the family as a multi-generational economic unit, can be traced back to at least the Zhou dynasty, roughly 1,000 years BCE. The Indian caste-based commercial guilds called shrenis were functioning sophisticated economic organizations as early as the 6th century BCE. Japanese merchant culture, codified in the Edo period under the Tokugawa shogunate, created family business philosophies so refined that some of those businesses, called shinies, are still operating today after 300, 400, even 1,000 years. The Kongo Gumi Construction Company in Japan, founded in 578 CE, that's the 6th century, is widely cited as the world's oldest continuously operating family business. It ran for over 1,400 years under family management before being absorbed into a larger conglomerate in 2006. So when we talk about Asian old money, we are often talking about systems that predate the European aristocratic tradition by centuries, sometimes by millennia. Before we go further, if you're finding this interesting, do me a favor and tap that like button right now. It genuinely helps this kind of in-depth content reach more people, and it tells me you want more videos like this one. Okay, back to it. The philosophical foundations, where the systems diverge. This is where it gets fascinating, and where most comparisons completely miss the point. Western old money is built, at its philosophical core, on individual legacy filtered through institutional trust. What does that mean? It means that in the Western tradition, wealth is understood as something that belongs, ultimately, to an individual, a patriarch, a matriarch, a named person. And the challenge of generational wealth is to transfer that individual wealth through institutions, trusts, foundations, corporations, banks, legal structures. The individual accumulates, the institution preserves. This is why Western old money families have historically been so obsessed with things like family trusts, legal wills, foundations, and endowments. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Institution, the Ford Foundation, the trust funds of the British aristocracy. These are mechanisms for taking one person's accumulated wealth and giving it a structure that can outlast any individual human life. The individual is the hero of the story. The institution is the vehicle. Now contrast this with the Asian, and particularly the Confucian-influenced East Asian philosophical foundation for wealth. In the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese traditions, influenced by Confucianism, wealth is understood, at its core, as something that belongs to the family as a collective entity across time. The individual is not the hero. The family is the hero. The individual is merely the current steward. This is a staggering philosophical difference, and it changes everything downstream. In the Confucian framework, the most important economic unit is not the individual and not even the nuclear family. It's the lineage, the clan, the multi-generational household. And crucially, this lineage extends in both directions. You have obligations to your ancestors, and you have obligations to your descendants. You are, in a very real sense, a link in a chain, rather than a standalone actor. This is why traditional Chinese family businesses operated under what scholars call the clan corporation model. The entire extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, was understood as having a stake in the family enterprise. Decisions were made collectively. Profits were distributed according to family hierarchy. And crucially, the family's reputation, its face, or mianzi, was understood as a collective asset, not a personal one. In the Indian tradition, particularly in the famous merchant castes like the Marwaris, the Gujarati Banias, and the Chettiars, you see a similar but distinct framework. Wealth is connected to dharma, to righteous duty within one's caste and community role. The merchant's obligation is not just to his family, but to his entire community. Traditional Indian merchant families built temples, funded schools, maintained wells, and supported the poor, not primarily as charity, but as the fulfillment of their cosmic role. Wealth was legitimate only insofar as it was properly deployed within the social order. And in Japan, the philosophical framework is different again. Edo period merchant culture was shaped by a school of thought called Sogo Shosha ethics, a kind of commercial Confucianism, combined with Buddhist ideas about impermanence. Japanese old merchant families developed a concept called norien, literally the fabric dividers that hang in shop doorways, as a metaphor for brand reputation. The norin was something sacred, something that belonged to generations past and future, something you were entrusted with but could never truly own. Take a moment to sit with that. In the West, wealth is something you build and then protect. In the Confucian East, wealth is something you are temporarily entrusted with on behalf of generations you will never meet. These are not just different strategies. They are different ontologies, different ideas about what wealth is and what it's for. The role of education. Nothing illustrates the difference between these two systems more clearly than how they think about education. In the Western old money tradition, education is, at its heart, about social access and network building. The great schools of the Western elite, Eton, Harrow, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, function primarily as sorting mechanisms and network generators. When a Rockefeller or a Vanderbilt sends their child to Harvard, the explicit goal is academic, yes, but the deeper goal is to place that child in a web of connections with the children of other elite families, future politicians, future bankers, future leaders. The education itself matters less than the social capital it generates. This is why old-school Thai culture, the idea that who you went to school with matters more than what you learned there, is such a defining feature of Western old money. The Bullingdon Club at Oxford, the Porcellian Club at Harvard, the secret societies of Yale. These are not anomalies. They are the actual point of elite Western education. Now look at the Chinese tradition, and the contrast is stark. China developed the world's first true meritocratic civil service examination system, the Keiju, around 605 CE during the Sui dynasty. For over 1,300 years, until it was abolished in 1905, this examination system was the primary mechanism of social advancement in China, and it tested not connections, not lineage, but classical learning, the ability to memorize and interpret the Confucian classics, to compose poetry in strict forms, to argue philosophy. The implications for how Chinese families think about education are profound. In the Chinese old money tradition, and this continues into the modern era among overseas Chinese families in Southeast Asia, education is not primarily about networking. It is about moral cultivation and demonstrable mastery. A son who studied hard and passed the imperial examinations brought honor to the family for generations. A son who merely inherited his father's business connections without cultivating his own learning was, in the Confucian framework, failing in his fundamental duty. This is why, even today, you see a pattern among wealthy Chinese families of extreme investment in academic achievement, not as a path to networking, but as a path to legitimacy. The two things look similar from the outside. Rich family sends kid to elite school, but the internal logic is completely different. In the Indian tradition, particularly among the Brahmin and merchant caste families, education was historically divided along precise lines. Brahmins cultivated Shastra, sacred textual knowledge. Kshatriyas cultivated martial arts and statecraft. Vaishyas, the merchant caste, cultivated numerical literacy, commercial knowledge, and the specific skills of trade. What's remarkable about traditional Indian merchant family education is how practical it was. Young men in Marwari families were sent to learn business by doing business, working in family enterprises from an early age, learning double-entry bookkeeping systems, understanding credit and interest, apprenticing in the family trade. It was education as professional formation, not social signaling. Japan offers yet another variation. In the Edo period, the great merchant houses, the Mitsui, the Sumitomo, the Konoike, developed internal education systems for their employees and family members. These were called Hokonen training systems, and they were extraordinarily rigorous, instilling not just business skills, but the philosophical values of the house: frugality, loyalty, long-term thinking. Young men would spend years in low-level positions before being trusted with greater responsibility. The education was inseparable from the moral formation of the person. And here's the thing that really gets me: we're not even at the most interesting part yet, because everything we've talked about so far, philosophy, education, all of it feeds into one of the most visible and most misunderstood differences between these two systems: how they think about displaying wealth. The display of wealth, the most visible difference. Now we get to the part that trips people up the most. There is a common stereotype, not entirely wrong, but deeply incomplete, that Western old money is about understatement, while Asian wealth is about display. The quiet, tasteful British aristocrat versus the flashy, logo-draped, crazy, rich Asian. This stereotype contains about 10% truth and 90% misunderstanding. Let's unpack it properly. Western old money and the aesthetics of restraint. The Western old money tradition of understatement is real, but it's important to understand that it is relatively recent and that it was, historically, a class weapon. Through most of European history, the aristocracy was extremely fond of display. Medieval knights wore elaborate heraldic colors. Renaissance nobles wore puffed sleeves and gold embroidery. The Versailles court of Louis XIV was a monument to conspicuous consumption as a political tool. Display, ostentatious, overwhelming display, was how you communicated power. The shift toward understatement happened in two stages. First, in the late 18th and early 19th century, with the rise of British aristocratic culture and the influence of Beau Brummel, the famous dandy who paradoxically made simplicity and perfect fit the hallmarks of gentlemanly dress, as opposed to elaborate ornamentation. Second, in the late 19th and early 20th century, as established wealth in America began to differentiate itself from the flashy robber barons by cultivating a counter-aesthetic of discretion. The classic American old money look, the faded chino, the old barber jacket, the understated watch, the house that needs a new coat of paint, but the furniture inside is priceless. This became a class signal. It was saying, we are so secure in our position that we don't need to prove anything. We have nothing to demonstrate. And this evolved into what sociologists call inconspicuous consumption, buying extremely expensive things that only other members of the elite would recognize as expensive. A Patek Philippe without diamonds, a Loro Piana sweater with no logo, a membership at a club you've never heard of. The signal is legible only to the initiated. That's the whole point. Now, Asian old money and the complexity of display. Here is where the stereotype breaks down. The reality of Asian old money attitudes toward display is not show everything. It is far more nuanced, and it varies significantly across cultures and historical periods. In traditional Chinese merchant culture, there was actually a strong tradition of concealing wealth. For most of Chinese imperial history, merchants occupied the lowest rung of the Confucian social hierarchy, below scholars, farmers, and artisans. Despite often being the wealthiest people in a city, merchant families were legally restricted from wearing certain colors, riding in sedan chairs, or engaging in other forms of aristocratic display. As a result, they developed a culture of hiding wealth behind modest exteriors. The great merchant families of Huizhou, The merchant scholar families who became enormously wealthy during the Ming and Qing dynasties built elaborate mansions, but inward-facing. From the street, a Huizhou merchant's house looked plain, even modest. Step inside the gate, and you entered a world of intricate carved wood, painted ceilings, private gardens, and refined classical art. The display was inward, reserved for family and honored guests. The public face was deliberately understated. This is a pattern you see replicated across Asia. The great Chettiar merchant family compounds in Tamil Nadu. Enormous, elaborate, privately magnificent, but closed to public view. The traditional Japanese machiya townhouses of Kyoto merchant families, a narrow, modest street face concealing deep, exquisitely designed interior spaces. The compound architecture of Southeast Asian Chinese merchant families, high walls, plain exteriors, extraordinary interiors. What's happening here is not the same as Western old money understatement, but it arrives at a similar external appearance through completely different logic. Western old money understatement says, "I am so secure, I don't need to show off." Traditional Asian merchant concealment says, "I am so wise, I know that showing off invites danger, envy, and the eye of the state." These are different philosophies producing superficially similar aesthetics. Now, and this is important, this does not mean that all Asian wealthy families practice concealment. In fact, certain Asian traditions have historically been extremely comfortable with lavish public display of wealth. The Mughal and Rajput traditions in India were emphatically about spectacular display. The great Havalis of Rajasthani merchants, some of the most elaborately decorated buildings in the world, were built specifically to communicate wealth and status publicly. The same is true for certain periods of Chinese history, particularly during the Song dynasty, when urban commercial culture flourished and merchant display was more culturally acceptable. And in contemporary Asia, particularly in newly wealthy environments like mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea, you see levels of public luxury display that far exceed anything in the contemporary West. But here's the key. Most scholars of wealth and status argue that this contemporary display culture is the behavior of new money in Asia, not old money. It is the behavior of families that are one or two generations into wealth and are in the process of establishing their status. The genuinely old money families of Asia, the established clans of Penang, the ancient merchant dynasties of Osaka, the old Chettiar families of Chennai, tend to be considerably more private about their wealth. Not because they follow the Western playbook, but because their own tradition tells them that security comes from privacy. Real quick, if you've made it this far into the video, you are clearly someone who cares about understanding these things at a deep level. Subscribe if you haven't already. I put a lot of work into these videos, and your subscription is what makes this channel possible. And hit the bell, I post new content every week. Okay, let's keep going, because we haven't even gotten to family structure yet, and that's where things get really interesting. Family structure and inheritance, the great divide. If you want to understand why Western old money families and Asian old money families behave so differently, look at how they structure inheritance. Because inheritance rules are not just financial decisions, they are statements about what a family is and what values it prioritizes. The Western primogeniture system. For most of European history, the dominant inheritance system among the aristocracy was primogeniture, the practice of leaving the entire estate, undivided, to the eldest son. The logic of primogeniture is cold but coherent. If you divide an estate equally among 5 children, and each of those children divides among their 5 children, within 3 generations, you have gone from one great estate to 125 tiny parcels. The family has effectively dissolved its wealth. Primogeniture prevents this by concentrating wealth in one line. The downside, of course, is brutal for everyone who is not the eldest son. Younger sons in aristocratic families had to find their own fortunes in the military, the church, trade, or colonial adventure. The classic British gentleman adventurer going off to make his fortune in India or the American colonies. Very often, a younger son cut out of the family inheritance. This system had profound social consequences. It created a large class of educated, connected, but financially precarious younger sons who became the driving force of British imperial expansion. It also meant that the emotional center of gravity in Western old money families tended to be intensely focused on the question of the heir, the single point of succession. Great art, great literature, and great family drama in the Western tradition are often about who gets to be the heir. Think of the entire plot of Downton Abbey. Think of King Lear. Think of the endless dynastic struggles of the European royal houses. The heir problem is the central problem of Western old money. The Asian approach, multiple models. Asian traditions took wildly different approaches to inheritance, and none of them fully replicate the European primogeniture model. In the traditional Chinese system, the dominant practice was equal division among sons. When a patriarch died, his estate was divided equally among his male heirs. This sounds like the opposite of primogeniture, and in individual terms it was. But Chinese merchant families developed sophisticated workarounds to prevent excessive fragmentation. The most important was the family corporation, or tang, a legal entity that held family assets collectively, preventing them from being divided. Family businesses were often registered as belonging to the tang, not to any individual family member. This meant that the wealth was collectively held and could not be unilaterally divided by any one heir. Decisions about the business required family consensus. Chinese families also practiced a sophisticated system of bringing promising relatives into the business. If one son was talented in commerce, he might be given managerial control of the business, while other sons received land or other assets. The goal was to keep the business intact while satisfying the principle of equal division. The result was a kind of wealth structure that is genuinely different from the Western model, more diffuse, more collective, more network-oriented. Chinese merchant clan networks, the Hokkien networks of Southeast Asia, the Hakka networks of the Caribbean, the Cantonese networks of North America, functioned as extended family economic ecosystems where trust, credit, and opportunity circulated through family ties across enormous geographic distances. The Indian joint family system. The traditional Indian joint family system, known in Hindu law as the Hindu undivided family, or HUF, is one of the most sophisticated family wealth preservation structures ever devised. Under the HUF system, a family's property is held collectively by all male members of the family and their wives and daughters. The family is managed by a karta, the senior male, who has the authority to make business decisions, but cannot unilaterally alienate the family's property. Every male born into the family automatically becomes a co-owner of the family property at birth. This creates a radically different psychological relationship to family wealth. An Indian man in a joint family doesn't think of his father's business as his father's. He thinks of it as his, along with his brothers, his uncles, and his cousins. This is not a metaphor. It is a legal reality. He is a co-sharer from birth. The HUF structure has proved remarkably durable. Many of the great Indian business families, the Tatas, the Birlas, the Godrej family, have roots in this joint family structure, and even as they have modernized and corporatized, the underlying ethos of collective family ownership has remained influential. The Japanese adoption system. Japan offers perhaps the most remarkable and least understood family wealth preservation mechanism of all, the practice of mukoyoshi, or adopted heir. In the Japanese merchant tradition, it was well understood that biological heirs are not always the most capable heirs. A brilliant merchant father might produce mediocre sons. So the solution was elegant: adopt an adult male who is brilliant. Not as a charity case, but as a genuine heir who takes the family name, marries into the family, often marrying a biological daughter, and inherits the business. This system, which was practiced by the great Edo merchant houses and continues in modified form in some Japanese family businesses today, meant that Japanese family businesses could select for competence across generations in a way that purely biological inheritance could not. The family name, the norin, the brand, these were preserved even as the genetic line shifted. The result, when researchers look at the world's oldest family businesses, Japan has a disproportionate share. Some estimates suggest Japan has more than 30,000 companies that are over 100 years old, and more than 3,000 that are over 200 years old. No other country comes close. The mukoyoshi system is a significant part of the reason. Here's something I want you to really think about for a second. In the Western system, if you don't have a capable biological son, your family dynasty ends. In the Japanese system, if you don't have a capable biological son, you find one and adopt him. One system is at the mercy of genetic luck. The other system engineered around genetic luck. Which one do you think produced more long-lasting family enterprises? Wealth and community, service versus philanthropy. Both the Western and Asian old money traditions have strong traditions of giving back. But what that giving looks like, and what it's for, is strikingly different. Western philanthropy, the individual gift. The Western tradition of elite philanthropy is, at its core, an individual act. Andrew Carnegie gave away his fortune. John D. Rockefeller founded his foundation. Bill Gates created the Gates Foundation. The philanthropist is a named individual making a personal moral choice to redirect personal wealth. And the philanthropy tends to be universalist in aspiration. Carnegie built libraries for everyone, anywhere. The Rockefeller Foundation funds global health initiatives. Western elite philanthropy, at its best, aspires to benefit humanity in general, not any particular community. This connects to the Protestant Christian tradition that underlies much of Western old money culture. The idea of stewardship, that wealth is a trust from God to be used for the common good, and the related Protestant idea that public giving is a moral demonstration of character. Carnegie's famous essay, The Gospel of Wealth, makes this explicit. The rich man is morally obligated to give his wealth away during his lifetime for the benefit of all. Asian community obligation, the collective duty. In the Asian traditions, giving is less a personal moral choice and more a structural obligation, an expected part of what it means to be a wealthy member of a community. In the Indian merchant tradition, wealthy families were expected to fund temples, dharmashalas, rest houses for travelers, wells, tanks, water reservoirs, and community halls. This was not charity in the Western sense. It was dharmic duty, the fulfillment of the social role that God and caste had assigned to a merchant family. To fail in this duty was to fail in a fundamental obligation, regardless of personal virtue. The Nattukotai Chettiars, the famous banking and merchant community from Tamil Nadu, built elaborate temple complexes, maintained community funds for the poor and sick among their own community, and funded educational institutions throughout South and Southeast Asia. But crucially, much of this giving was community-specific. It served the Chettiar community first, the broader public second. This is not selfishness. It reflects a different understanding of social obligation, where loyalty flows outward from immediate family, to clan, to caste community, to the wider world. In Chinese merchant culture, the huiguan, the native place association, served a similar function. Chinese merchants who had migrated to a new city would establish a huiguan for all merchants from their home region. The huiguan maintained a temple, ran a hospital, arbitrated commercial disputes, provided welfare for sick or destitute community members, and organized the repatriation of bodies for burial in the home village. This was not charity. It was community infrastructure, funded by the wealthiest members as an obligation of leadership. Even in Japan, the great merchant families were expected to contribute to the welfare of their local community through what was called kokin, contributions to the public good. The Sumitomo family built hospitals and parks. The Mitsui family maintained public works. But these contributions were understood not as personal generosity, but as the fulfillment of the merchant family's role within the social order. What this difference tells us. The distinction here is between universalist philanthropy, Western, and communitarian obligation, Asian. Neither is inherently superior, but they produce very different social ecosystems. Western universalist philanthropy tends to produce grand public goods, Carnegie libraries, university endowments, public health initiatives, that are available to anyone, often disconnected from any specific community. Asian communitarian obligation tends to produce dense, resilient, community-specific social infrastructure, networks of mutual aid, community funds, temples that serve as community centers, that is deeply embedded in specific social groups. The tension between these models is visible in contemporary philanthropy debates. Should wealthy individuals give to abstract global causes, or to the specific communities that helped create their wealth? Privacy, secrecy, and social media. Both the Western and Asian old money traditions share a strong preference for privacy. But again, the reasons and the mechanisms differ. In the Western old money tradition, privacy is about maintaining class boundaries and noblesse oblige. The idea that true aristocrats do not need to seek attention. The famous British upper-class disdain for showing off is deeply rooted. Talking about money, displaying money, being photographed for tabloids, these are things that the established upper class regards as vulgar, not evil, just aesthetically and socially inferior. This is a relatively soft form of privacy preference. It's about social taste and class signaling. In many Asian old money traditions, the preference for privacy runs much deeper, rooted in historical experience of political danger. Chinese merchant families learned over centuries that visible wealth invited taxation, expropriation, and persecution. During periods of political instability, and Chinese history is full of them, wealthy families that had kept their assets hidden survived. Families that had displayed their wealth were often targeted. This created a deep cultural DNA around concealment. The Chinese concept of Kaibu Lu Bai, roughly don't display your wealth, is not just good taste. It is survival wisdom encoded into culture across generations of risk. In contemporary terms, this plays out in fascinating ways. You will often find that the wealthiest family in a Southeast Asian city is completely unknown to the general public. They own major real estate, control significant businesses, sit on the boards of major institutions, and yet their name means nothing to the average person. This is engineered invisibility, a feature not a bug, a continuation of a cultural tradition that has proved adaptive across centuries. I want to do a full separate video on how old money families, both Eastern and Western, actually structure their privacy in the digital age. Trust structures, family offices, nominee ownership, the whole architecture of privacy. If that sounds interesting to you, comment privacy below, and I'll prioritize that video. Your comments genuinely drive what I make next. What happens when the systems collide? Contemporary implications. We live in a world where Asian old money and Western old money are increasingly interacting through global education, international business, cross-cultural marriages, and diaspora communities. And the collision of these two systems is producing fascinating new hybrid models. Consider the wealthy overseas Chinese business families of Southeast Asia, the Kuoks of Malaysia, the Hartono family of Indonesia, the Danin Cheravanon family of Thailand. These families built their fortunes using distinctly Chinese cultural methods: clan networks, guanxi relationships, collective family structures, but they operate within Western structured legal and financial systems. They send their children to Oxford and Harvard. They establish Western-style foundations. They hire Western-trained CFOs and lawyers. But internally, the family logic remains deeply Confucian. The patriarch still commands enormous deference. The family council still makes ultimate decisions. The sense of obligation to the extended family remains intact. Or consider the Tata family of India, one of the most celebrated business dynasties in the world. The Tata Group operates with boards, professional managers, and Western corporate governance structures. But the Tata family's relationship to their business is saturated with Gandhian and Parsi ethical frameworks that are distinctly non-Western. When Ratan Tata says that the purpose of the Tata Group is to serve India, that's not corporate PR. It's a genuine expression of a philosophical tradition about the purpose of enterprise that has no real parallel in Western business culture. What we are watching in real time is the emergence of a new kind of global old money, one that draws on multiple traditions simultaneously, that speaks the language of Western finance while thinking in the frameworks of Asian family obligation. And this has implications for anyone who is building wealth today. Lessons for wealth builders today. Let me make this practical. Whether you are building wealth in Lagos or London, in Kuala Lumpur, or Kentucky, in Chennai or Chicago, there are lessons from both of these traditions that apply directly to how you think about money, family, and legacy. Lesson 1. Define what wealth is for before you define how to accumulate it. Both the Western and Asian old money traditions, despite their differences, share this. They had a theory of wealth. They knew why wealth mattered and what it was supposed to do. Western old money said, wealth funds family legacy and social service. Asian old money said, wealth sustains the family lineage and fulfills community obligation. Most people building wealth today have no theory of what their wealth is for. They just want more. That's not enough. Without a theory of purpose, wealth has no guidance system. It dissipates. Lesson 2. Think in generations, not years. The single most consistent feature of both Western and Asian old money traditions is the time horizon. They think in decades and generations, not quarters and years. The Japanese merchant family wondering how to ensure the business survives 100 years. The Indian merchant family building a temple that will stand for 500 years. Even the Western trust structure is designed to outlast any individual. If you think about your financial decisions as someone who is one link in a long chain, rather than someone who is trying to maximize your individual take, your decisions will be fundamentally different. More patient, more structural, more focused on building things that outlast you. Lesson 3. Community is infrastructure. The great Asian merchant traditions understood something that most modern wealth-building advice ignores. Community relationships are a form of wealth. The network of obligations, favors, trust, and mutual support that a Marwari merchant family built over generations was as valuable as any financial asset, and considerably more resilient to market crashes, political upheaval, and natural disaster. Modern advice focuses almost exclusively on financial assets, stocks, real estate, businesses. It largely ignores social capital, community standing, reciprocal obligation networks, deep relationships with people who share your values and goals. The old money traditions, East and West, understood that these were inseparable. Lesson 4. Privacy is a strategy, not a personality trait. Both traditions, for different reasons, understood that visibility of wealth is a liability. The Western aristocrat understated wealth to maintain class position and avoid vulgarity. The Chinese merchant concealed wealth to avoid political targeting. The Japanese merchant hid wealth behind modest facades to maintain social harmony. In a world where social media has made wealth display into a competitive sport, this ancient wisdom is worth remembering. Visibility attracts envy, entitlement, conflict, and predation. The families that have maintained wealth longest are almost universally the least visible. Lesson 5. Who you designate as your successor matters more than who you produce. The Japanese adoption system is the most radical expression of this, but all the great wealth traditions understood it. The question of succession is too important to leave entirely to biology. Identifying capable successors, whether biological or not, training them deliberately, and ensuring leadership transitions are managed with care is one of the most important things a family enterprise can do. Countless family fortunes have been lost, not because of bad investments, but because of badly managed successions. If this video gave you a new lens for thinking about wealth, legacy, and family, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. What surprised you most? What do you want to explore further? And if you want to go deeper, I've got a full playlist on generational wealth and family office structures, linked right here. Like this video if it delivered value. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of deep dive content. And share it, because this is exactly the kind of conversation that doesn't happen enough. Here's the thing I want you to take away from all of this. For most of human history, the question of how to build and maintain wealth across generations has been one of the central preoccupations of human civilization. Every major culture has grappled with it. Every major civilization has developed sophisticated answers to it. The Western tradition developed one set of answers: individual legacy, institutional preservation, primogeniture, social understatement, universalist philanthropy. The Asian traditions developed other answers: collective family identity, community obligation, shared ownership structures, private display, communitarian giving. Neither system is right, Both systems have produced extraordinary multi-generational wealth. Both systems have also failed, spectacularly, repeatedly, when their core principles were abandoned, or when the world changed faster than the family could adapt. What distinguishes the families that survive across centuries, in both traditions, is not any particular financial strategy. It is the depth and coherence of their values. The Confucian family that truly internalizes collective responsibility. The Protestant family that truly internalizes stewardship. The families that are not just wealthy, but that have a shared understanding of what their wealth means and what it demands of them. And that clarity of purpose, that depth of values, that willingness to think not just about next year, but about the next century, is available to anyone. You don't have to be born into old money to think like old money. You just have to be willing to ask the questions that old money families have always asked. What is this wealth for? Who are we building it with? Who are we building it for? And what are we willing to sacrifice to make it last? I'll see you in the next one.